For the first time in over half a decade, the Royals will have a chance at a second half push. What do we think it'll look like? We'll tell you next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit your follow button and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Though the Royals are on a road trip and a lengthy one at that, there's still plenty of chances to buy tickets for things happening wherever you're at. If you're in Kansas City, I know there's a big concert coming up at Arrowhead Stadium. Use Game Time to buy those tickets, and we'll tell you why coming up a little bit later on in today's show. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing as well. We'll be taking over Chiefs post-game coming up for the football season. So if you want to check me out over there, 810 WHB is where it's at. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you are going to get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, Monday through Friday. Again, questions and comments can always be left to my Twitter handle at JohnnyJ_15 or on our YouTube page of Locked On Royals. We teased this a little bit in yesterday's episode, late last night, that today's show was going to be previewing what's next, maybe going over some rumors of potential trade acquisitions, who the Royals could be looking at. But I thought today, to kick off the show, would be a good time to really evaluate what is next, truly next for the Royals. I know yesterday's episode was about who they're going to be playing, but now I want to shift gears and talk about the overall impact of what these next 80 or so games are going to look like. Because barring a collapse here in the final weeks of June, the Royals are going to be playing over 500 on July 1st for the first time since 2017. Now, on July 1st in 2017, I don't believe they were over 500, but they got to over 500 later on in July, and then made a couple of trade deadline acquisitions. We remember the Padres trade with Ryan Buchter, Brandon Maurer, and Trevor Cahill, and then also got Melky Cabrera. That was the last time the Royals had a quote-unquote second-half push, and it was an unsuccessful one. This feels like a different type of team, different scenario. The 2017 Royals were going through one last ride. And Dayton Moore, I remember, had talked about it in a way of we wanted to honor those players and give them one last chance at making a playoff run. It didn't work out because back then a lot of people were wondering, why didn't you sell off a lot of those players? And, hindsight's always 20/20. If the Royals would have sold at the deadline at the end of July, I think everybody would have wanted Dayton Moore's head on a platter, because they were playing winning baseball and they were as hot as they had been all season long. And then, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, and let's include 2023 happened. Well, the last 6 years of baseball in Kansas City have been treacherous, and we have not been in a situation like this. The fan base, people who have covered the team in a very long time. But even in 2017, that second half push was more so of trying to get their foot in the door of the playoffs, where this particular push is going to be about holding a playoff spot. So instead of having that pressure of you got to keep pace, this is more so about you got to keep teams away. And I envision in these next 3 months, because I'll go back to what I said, I believe it was maybe a month ago when previewing June, or maybe it was toward the end of May, right before the gauntlet of games they went through. I had mentioned that June was going to be the dictator as to how this season was going to go. If they could survive that 20-game stretch of playing incredibly difficult teams, they were going to be in the postseason. And I do stand by that fact that they have survived it. I'm not going to go back on my word. My prediction is that they will be playing playoff baseball this year. Could be wrong. I'll admit when I'm wrong. If they are on the outskirts of the postseason, by the time we wrap up this season, I'll admit where I was wrong. And I will admit that I drank the blue Kool-Aid, whatever you want it to be, whatever you want to call it. I can admit that. But I am going to stand by the fact that this second half push is also incredibly important for the fan base support, for the direction of the organization, and I think for future seasons down the road. That kind of goes hand in hand with the direction of this franchise. Because to pull this off, right, to go from 106 losses to making it to the playoffs, and even if that playoff berth means getting swept in the wild card series, to some of you, that may not be good enough. That may just be a participation trophy of, hey, we actually got in there, but we weren't competitive at all. Or you could be the side of, hey, that was playoff baseball. We got back in there. We were one of the more improbable stories. And though we're disappointed on how the season ended, wouldn't trade it for anything because a lot of us didn't view a season like this happening for 2 or 3 more years down the road. There were moments last year doing this podcast, and I probably had mentioned it a time or two, where I compared the 2023 Royals more so to the 2008, 2009 Royals, where you felt like they were just so far away, or maybe more so the 2011 Royals where they had some young pieces, but they were still, 2, 3, 4 years away from serious contention. This has changed everything because of what these free agents were able to accomplish, the step forward a lot of the young players were able to make. And now I think it's about honoring this type of start. And I believe JJ Picollo is going to do that with this baseball club. I think that he is going to reward them for being a playoff team. I think he is going to give them the extra help they need. But this is what this city has been waiting for now for 7 years. To be proud of your baseball team, to want to go to Kauffman Stadium, to scoreboard watch, to not be mocked by the rest of baseball for how irrelevant you became after winning a World Series, right? I mean, it's been a long time since you have been able to turn on a game on the West Coast. I want to spin it into tonight's game. Game on the West Coast, it's 8:40, and you're excited. You're waiting all day for tonight's game against the Oakland Athletics. Last year, I wouldn't blame you one bit if you didn't watch a single pitch of that series, in which the Royals lost, by the way. They lost the season series to Oakland. They'll have a chance to win the season series for the first time since 2015 tonight. But last year, it was such a downtrodden year. It was such a negative year that it's making this type of run all the better. And it makes it all the better if you stuck with the team in these down years, in these dark years. And I'd imagine if you had lived through the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, late 2000s, and years in the 90s, although they had better years in the 90s, of course, than the 2000s. But if you'd gone through that, it was a no-brainer for you to stick with the team. And it made it a lot easier to stick with the team after they had won a World Series. But that fall off was pretty tremendous. I mean, they didn't have a winning record after they won the World Series. They went 81 and 81 in 2016 and 80 and 82 in 2017. They had a 100-loss season in 18, 100-loss season in 19. Shortened COVID year, didn't come close to the playoffs. 2021, they lost 84, 86 games, I think it was. And then 2022 lost 95, or it was 97 in the ballpark of that. And then last year they lose 106. So 3 100-loss seasons since winning the World Series. And I know this is more of a general and a big picture type of segment, but it's important that the Royals can stay the course, keep people engaged, and more than keep people engaged, keep everybody buying in. I know for a lot of people, you're already bought in. I mean, we are 73 games in. Yeah, 73 games into the season. There's still a long ways to go. There's still 3 months of baseball to go. The Royals could collapse. The Royals could take off, but it's a matter that they're in this spot and have an opportunity at a second half push. And unlike 2017, unlike 2014 for that matter, unlike 2013, they're not gunning for a playoff spot. They're not chasing. They have one, and they're trying to keep teams away from them. And it comes down now to how long they can sustain it, because sustainability doesn't end after 80 games or 100 games. You can buy into who that team is, but sustainability is through 162. The Royals need to probably be as good as they were in May, now in this stretch of games where they play a lot of bad teams. They can't go down to the level of competition they're playing, which we discussed in last night's episode. It's important to build that cushion back up and keep this second half push manageable. You don't want to get desperate where you're having to win 9 of 10 in September because of all the bad baseball you played in August or all the bad baseball you played in July. Second half pushes are fun. Deadlines are more fun when you're buyers. I expect both to happen for this baseball team, and it's going to be important for not only this franchise, but for this city to cap off this incredible start with an incredible finish. We'll talk about the A's series coming up next, but before we do that, want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Like I said, when we come back, let's break down this series against the Oakland Athletics that begins tonight in the Bay Area. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before our next segment, I want to talk about a couple sponsors, starting with Game Time. Though the Royals are on the road, and they will be on the road until next week, there's still plenty of things to go and attend either in the Kansas City area or wherever you may be listening. I already teased it a little bit that there's a big concert coming up in a few weeks at Arrowhead Stadium, the Kenny Chesney concert, which happens pretty much every single summer. It's a big deal if you live in this area. I know for some of you listening, you may be going, but if you haven't bought the tickets yet, do so over at Game Time. It's my favorite app to use when I'm buying tickets to baseball games, concerts, comedy shows, doesn't matter. Game Time's always going to have me covered. So here's what you need to do. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We also want to talk about Supply House, where you can get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get you a competitive edge by joining supplyhouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. So the series begins tonight in Oakland against an A's team that has lost 9 in a row. They have slumped back into what we expected the Oakland Athletics to be, which was a 100-loss baseball team. If it weren't for the White Sox, I think the A's would be getting a lot more coverage on how bad they've been and wrapping up another dismal year, one of the last years at O.co. And I do want to say going into this series, I feel absolutely gutted for Oakland fans. And it's funny because during football season, I don't think Kansas Cityans have much sympathy for Oakland folk or Las Vegas folk because of the Raiders. And I think Raiders fans would feel the same way about Kansas City, that when the Royals are struggling, and I'm sure A's fans don't really feel that bad for the Royals. Maybe it's because of the wild card game. Maybe it's because of that carryover from the football season. But tonight when I'm watching the game, I do think it's sad for the state of baseball that a game will be played tonight. And even though Oakland's not very good, there's not going to be anybody there. It's going to look like a minor league game. And it's played on a football field. That makes it even worse. But we've seen when that stadium is at its best. I remember numerous games in the 2010s and 2000s where Oakland would be packed and it would be fun to watch a game there. It was always a tough environment to go into, and now it's a tough environment for different reasons. If you come out flat, you're not going to be juiced up by anything. You'll be able to hear in the other dugouts. You'll be able to hear chatter from players on the field. You'll hear that little cowbell out in the outfield. It's just a wasteland at this point. And I'm not meaning that as a derogatory thing or anything. It's just nobody's there. Nobody's there to watch this baseball game. And it's not the fans' fault. It's absolutely on ownership, John Fisher, and what he did to those fans, what he's done to this baseball club. It's bad for baseball. And yeah, I'd imagine that years down the road, whenever I venture to Las Vegas, I'll probably try to catch a game there, depending if it works out. And I'm sure it'll be cool. I'm sure they'll have flashy new uniforms. Maybe they'll spend more money on the team. But tonight, I think it's always one of those series of the year that puts me in a somber mood because it's late into the evening. There's nobody there. Kind of reminds you of the 2020 COVID year. And again, it is no slight on the fans. The fans have been wronged by ownership. The fans are dedicated. They're loyal. Those that are still going out there and watching and tuning in to A's baseball, I tip my cap to you because the Royals were not far off for a number of years in 18, 19, 2022, and 2023. Just bad baseball. Not everybody wanted to show up to the game. But at least sometimes there were star players to go and watch during those down years. The Royals had, Salvador Perez still. When Whit Merrifield was leading the league in hits and stolen bases, there was something to watch. Oakland hasn't had that for quite some time. They do have Mason Miller this year. They've had quite the career turnaround with Brent Rooker. I always loved Zach Geloff as a young player, and I know he struggled a little bit this year, but there are pieces to like. It's just hard to get fired up for a series like this. And the Royals are going to have to be careful in a series like this because this Oakland team can sneak up on you, right? In the Minnesota series they just came from, the A's got swept, but there were a couple of times that they had a lead. They blew that lead. They scored 7 runs in one of the games. I think they had 5 or 6 runs in the other. They were close in a couple of them, but at the end of the day, a loss is a loss. And they've done that 9 times in a row now. So the Royals have to go in after this off day. They've got 3 great pitching matchups where they have the advantage. Alec Marsh tonight, Cole Reagans tomorrow, Seth Lugo on Thursday. You can't be flat. Okay, and actually the A's have some guys throwing that have some upside to them. Hogan Harris tonight has been pretty decent. He's coming off 3 straight really good starts. Luis Medina throws incredibly hard. There are pieces where they could get the best of you. And as I said in yesterday's episode, it's hard to lose 13 times in a row, even if you're trying, because the other team might have an off night. They may not be as good at the plate. The Royals have historically struggled at the Coliseum. So that part I'm not looking forward to. I am looking forward to the fact that the Royals get to play a team that's lost 9 in a row in front of basically nobody. And it's different than the Dodgers. It's different than the Yankees, different than the Mariners, different than the Guardians. They get that let up. But you almost have this pressure of you got to sweep them. I mean, you have 2 of your best guys throwing and one of your pitchers who's coming off a 7-inning, 1-hit performance against the Yankees. Like, you should, by all accounts, sweep this team. And you should hand them 12 losses in a row. I think I said 13 yesterday and today. It would be 12 losses in a row because the A's have only lost 9 in a row. Can't be flat, though, because you're not going to get the juice from the crowd. The good thing is if you have a 1-run lead in the 8th or the 9th, you're not dealing with a chaotic crowd like you used to at the Coliseum. You're just going to have to win the game simply with the fundamentals and just baseball IQ. That's how I look at series like this. You have to be mentally prepared. You can't get lax. You can't get distracted by playing in a massive stadium where nobody's there against a team that's not really playing for much. It's always a weird vibe, a weird environment at the Coliseum. But to me, the theme of this is just not coming out flat. Don't put yourself in a 3-0 hole late in the game. And even though I would give them a good chance to come back and win that, even against a good bullpen like Oakland, or at least with guys that are above average, a Mason Miller, an Ursig, Austin Adams. I don't think you want to put yourself in a spot where you're clawing back. Tonight, I would love to see the Royals pounce on Oakland in the first inning, get 3 or 4 runs, and let Alec Marsh coast. That is my dream scenario for all 3 games of this series. They seem to have ironed out not giving up runs in the first inning. This is one of those series where I hope you can just flex your muscles with your pitching staff, the 3 starters you're throwing, dominate Oakland, and then head off to Arlington, where you'd be 12 games over 500 and taking on a Rangers team that's really struggling at the moment. So back-to-back teams this week from the AL West that are just down bad right now. Dire straits for both of those teams in the A's and the Texas Rangers. But unlike the Rangers series, which we'll be down for, this Oakland series, it's about not being flat. The Rangers, I don't think you have to worry about being flat. Nice, brand new stadium. Going to be big crowds, a weekend series. Oakland, it's midweek. Not a lot of people there. Team that's not playing well. Don't stoop down to that competition level. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, want to tell you a little bit more about Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. When we return, let's talk about the All-Star voting, now that Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez are not the leading vote getters at their position. They are trailing 2 Baltimore Orioles, and I'm going to tell you what I wish the American League or just Major League Baseball could do to make everybody happy. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just hit that red follow button and subscribe. Want to tell you about a couple more of our sponsors, starting with Prize Picks, where you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds, and you just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stats projections, and you're locked in. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays, which increases your chance of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. So here's what you need to do. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That is LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. We also want to talk a little bit about Prize Picks, one of our local sponsors here in the Kansas City area. It is summertime. I'm sure for a lot of you listening, it's golf season as well as baseball season for you. But if you are struggling with your game a little bit, why not go into PXG Golf and get fitted for your driver, your putter, long-range game, short-range game? It does not matter. It is such a cool experience over there. They're going to help you out. It's an awesome place. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. I would say that it is just so much fun to go to. The people there are great, and they made me a believer. They'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City, and you can visit them at pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City, 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen golf balls free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals, and the limit is 1 dozen golf balls per person. This promotion ends on June 30th. The other terms and conditions may apply, but you can see their store for details. So the All-Star game is getting closer and closer. I'm going to be down there in Arlington this weekend, so I'll maybe be able to see some early setups. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of promotion around the stadium at Globe Life Field, no longer Globe Life Park. Can't wait for the upcoming series this weekend to see the Royals on the road, but can't wait for the All-Star game as well. And whereas we discussed it last week, the impression was, Bobby Witt Jr. was going to be the leading vote getter over Gunnar Henderson. That is not the case at this point. Bobby Witt Jr. is second to Gunnar Henderson, who was the leading vote getter from the Baltimore Orioles. Salvador Perez, with his recent slump, has fallen behind Adley Rutschman. in the race to be the starting catcher for the American League. And I do think that Salvi might be in a tough spot now with the way that Rutschman's playing, the Orioles are playing, and the way Salvi's been slumping a little bit of late. But I do still think Salvi and Bobby are obviously going to get into the All-Star game. That's not really a question at this point. But what I wanted to almost make a PSA about was that I wish Major League Baseball wasn't stuck on positions. We see it in the outfield a few times. Like I remember there was one year that Mike Trout had to move a position in the All-Star game, where they had to move somebody from center to right, and it didn't look maybe as pleasing as I would have liked it to. Like seeing Mike Trout in right field is just weird because I only know him as a center fielder, but it was to get the best players out there. And what's really unfortunate for this upcoming All-Star game is that either Gunnar Henderson or Bobby Witt Jr. is not going to start. And those are two of the best players in the sport right now. Gunnar and Bobby are both top 5 in AL MVP voting. Top 3, I think, now that I think he might have leapfrogged Juan Soto. I need to go back and double check it. It moves around a little bit. Top 5 for sure. I can't remember if it's top 3 with Aaron Judge, Bobby Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson. I know Juan Soto is right there. So let's just say top 4 to put a ribbon on that debate. But what I wish they would do with the infield is, if you have a situation like this, move one of them over to second base. I would usually say third base because both Gunnar and Bobby have played third before, but I'm not bumping Jose Ramirez off that spot. Jose Ramirez is absolutely deserving of the starting spot at third base for the All-Star game. Now, this one's probably a little bit biased, but I would love to see either Gunnar Henderson or Bobby Witt Jr. over Jose Altuve at second base. I get it that Altuve, by all accounts, has been the best second baseman in the American League this year, and it would be unfair to him, who only plays that spot, to get bumped out for a guy who doesn't play that spot. But for baseball to grow the sport, for baseball to get a lot of eyeballs on there, why would you not want Bobby Witt Jr. and Gunnar Henderson on the same field up the middle? You could put Bobby Witt Jr. at second base for all I care. If it needs to be Gunnar, sure. And maybe they could do something like that, where to put Bobby in the game, maybe after the first inning, they could have Gunnar and Bobby Witt Jr. up the middle in the infield. I mean, why would you not want that as a baseball fan? If you're an Astros fan, sure, I get it. You're probably not happy that I said to bump Altuve out. But Bobby Witt Jr. or Gunnar Henderson doesn't deserve to be sitting the bench to start the game, to not be recognized and honored at Globe Life Field, to run out there with their jersey on, in the same way they do for opening day lineups, where they go down the line and, they are just recognized in such a memorable way. Both of those guys deserve to be starters. The reality is baseball's not going to do that because it's not the way all-star voting works. You can't move Gunnar Henderson or Bobby Witt Jr., who don't play second base, over to second base. I just wish there was a way they could do that. Because the All-Star game, now that it's not deciding who gets home field advantage in the World Series, why not have some fun with it? I understand that you don't want to get any player injured in that, but I also don't think that you handle that type of situation in a fearful manner. I don't think that you look at the All-Star game and go, I don't want my player to get hurt. I'm fearful watching my player because they might get hurt. I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way at all. And also playing another position, unless you went completely, off the script, you put Bobby Witt Jr. in the outfield, I don't think you need to worry about that at all. I just wish there would be a way to get them on the same field at the same time. It'll be great to have more than just one Royal in the All-Star game, being, of course, Bobby and Salvi. I think Cole Reagans gets in as well as just a reserve. But, man, I would love to see Bobby Witt Jr. be a starter over Gunnar Henderson. I hate that for Gunnar Henderson, but we're a Royals podcast. We're, of course, going to want Bobby Witt Jr. over Gunnar Henderson. And I know for a lot of people in baseball, it's a hot topic right now, a hot debate. Who's better? Who would you want long-term? I know for a lot of voters, you'll either just look at average or home runs. Gunnar has twice as many home runs as Bobby. Bobby's got the higher average. Bobby's got more RBIs, more stolen bases. I think he's a better fielder. Again, that's more of the bias playing into it. But both guys are just superstar athletes, and I would wish there would be a way to get both them starting in the same lineup, but Doesn't look like it's going to happen. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Tomorrow, we're going to break down what happened in Game 1 of that series against the Oakland Athletics. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.